welcome to Biology, the scientific study of life. In general, an animal's maximum possible metabolic rate is inversely related to the duration of activity, as shown this figure. Contrasts ectothermic and endothermic strategies for sustaining activity over different times intervals. Both an alligator ectothermic and a human endotherm are capable of very intense exercise in short spurts of a minute or less. During these sprints, the ATP present in muscle cells and ATP generated anaerobically by glycolysis are sufficient to power the activity. Neither the ectotherm nor the endotherm can sustain their maximum metabolic rates and peak levels of activity over longer periods of exercise. Though the endotherm has an advantage in such endurance, this sustained activity depends on the aerobic process of cellular respiration for ATP supply, and endotherm's respiration rate is about 10 times greater than an ectotherm's. Only a few ectotherms, such as migratory monarch, butterflies, or salmon, are capable of long duration activities. Between the extremes of BMR or SMR and maximum metabolic rate, many factors influence energy requirements, including age, sex, size, body and environmental temperature, quality and quantity of food, activity level, oxygen availability, and hormonal balance. Time of day also plays a role. Birds, humans, and many insects are usually active and therefore have their highest metabolic rates during daylight hours. In contrast, bats, mice, and many other mammals generally are active and have their highest metabolic rates at night or during the hours of dawn and dusk. Metabolic rates measured when animals are performing a variety of activities give a better idea of the energy costs of everyday life. For most terrestrial animals, both endotherms and ectotherms, the average daily rate of energy consumption is 2 to 4 times BMR or SMR. Humans in most developed countries have an unusually low average daily metabolic rate of about 1.5 times BMR, an indication of relatively sedentary lifestyle. As shown this figure, notice that maximum notice this is the notice the maximum metabolic represents kilocalorie minute log scale, and this line the time second, minute, hour, time interval, day, week. Notice the human also 60 kilogram human and alligator 60 kilogram. The yellow represents existing intracellular ATP, and orange represent of white represents ATP from glycolysis, and orange represent ATP from aerobic respiration. Maximum metabolic rates over different time spans. The bars compare an ectotherm alligator and an ectotherm human for their maximum potential metabolic rates and ATP sources over different durations of time. The human's basal metabolic rate about 1 to 0.2 kilocalorie each minute is much greater than the alligator's BMR, partly contributes to his ability to sustain a higher maximum metabolic rate over a longer period, as shown this figure. Notice that energy budgets. Different species of animals use the energy of materials in food in different ways depending on their environments, behavior, size, and basic strategy of endothermy and ectothermy. For most animals, the majority of food is devoted by to the production of ATP, and relatively little goes to growth or to reproduction. However, the amount of energy used for BMR or SMR activity and body temperature control varies considerably between species. For example, consider the typical energy budgets for terrestrial vertebrates. A 25 kilogram female deer mouse, as shown this figure, 4 kilogram female python, also 4 kilogram male Adelis penguin, as shown this figure, and a 60 kilogram female human. We will assume that all of these animals reproduce during the year. The female human spends a large fraction of her energy budgets for BMR and relatively little for activity and body temperature regulation. The small amount of growth, about 1 point or 1% of body fat, or 5 to 6 kilogram of other tissues, one of her annual energy budget is equivalent to adding about 1 kilogram of food, fat, or 5 to 6 kilogram of other tissues. The cost of 9 months of pregnancy and several months of breastfeeding amounts to only 5 to 8% of mother's annual energy requirements. A male penguin spends a much larger fraction of his energy expenditures for activity because he swims to catch food, because the penguin is well insulated and fairly large. He has relatively low costs of temperature regulation in spite of living in the cold Antarctic environment. His reproduction costs about 6% of annual energy expenditures, mainly coming from incubating eggs, brooding, and bringing food to his chicks. Penguins, like most bears, do not grow once they are adults. The female deer mouse spends a large fraction of her energy budget for temperature regulation because of the high surface to volume ratio that goes with the small size. Mice lose body heat rapidly and must constantly generate metabolic heat to maintain body temperature. Female deer mice spend about 12% of their energy budget on reproduction. In contrast to these endothermic animals, the ectothermic python has no temperature regulation costs like most reptiles. She grows continuously throughout life. In the example, this figure, the snake added about 750 gram of new body tissue. She also produced about 650 gram of eggs. The python's economical ectothermic strategy is revealed by her very low energy expenditure by unit mass, which is only 1 to 40 of the energy expended by the similarly sized endothermic penguin. Back to energy budgets for four animals as shown this figure. When total annual energy expenditures, the slices of the P charts indicate energy. Notice that annual energy expenditure, kilocalorie each year or yearly. Notice also the fraction here, reproduction. Orange one represent reproduction, and yellow represent temperature regulation, and the blue one growth represents activity, yellow, and the green one represents basic standard metabolism. Notice also the fraction, the large one or larger is metabolism. 60 kilogram females human from temperate climate. Notice also 4 kilogram male penguin from Antarctica brooding. Notice also the fraction the comparing also between the human, notice also the standard metabolism. Back to female deer mouse from temperate North America. Notice also the differences between the human. Um, Notice the fraction here, also smaller. Uh, 25 kilogram female deer mouse from temperate North America, and female python from Australia. Notice also is more or larger than the female deer mouse. Energy expenditures per unit mass kilocalorie each day, comparing the day energy expenditures per kilogram of body weight for weight for the four animals reinforces two important concepts of bioenergetics. Versus small animals such as a mouse has a much greater energy demand per kilogram than does a large animal of the same taxonomic class, such as a human. Both mammals. Second, note again that an ectotherm such as a python requires much less energy per kilogram than does an endotherm of equivalent size such as a penguin.